Today on Substance Stories, we're going to be talking to Angelica von Sanden, writer of the hit book, Sit, Stay, Grow. I am joined by Angelica von Sanden, a local author, and I'm very happy to say the first author of a book in the DDP library. So the DDP library, Angelica, is I run a dual diagnosis unit at the Victoria Clinic, and I buy a few books that are just there for currently the patients to steal, but hopefully the patients to borrow. And there's, I think, 6 or 7 books in it, and yours is one of it. I'm a huge fan of Sit, Stay, Grow. I've had to buy 10 to 20 copies over the last few months due to patients continuously stealing the copies. So they're huge fans as well. So it's a huge pleasure to have you on. Sit, Stay, Grow is this wonderful book about acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And I thought we'd just talk about ACT, and it's obviously a really important therapeutic mechanism for addiction. So I thought we'd just talk about ACT, and thank you so much for joining us, Angelica.
Thank you for having me, Richard. Pleasure. And let's start with the book, because I think it is really important to point out for those who want to read it or want to steal it that it has no psychological jargon. So what we are talking today about is not featured in the book. So the book is full of stories. It is full of really light, fun stories, but it has deeper, meaningful, and it is based on acceptance and commitment therapy. And today, as you said, we would like to talk about acceptance and commitment therapy as a therapeutic approach.
Yeah, and I should say even though it uses constantly the dog park and dogs metaphor, it's not actually about dogs, because I think every time I talk to people about this, they're like, "Oh, it's like a dog training book." So it's not.
No,
it's,
it's probably a mind training book where puppy dogs and minds can be very similar, because I have the tendency to run really wild. I don't know about your mind, Richard, but I'm just guessing your mind is running often really, really wild.
Oh no,
Like
Angelica, my mind is
puppy.
like a German army soldier, straight on track. No worries.
But
Um,
even this one needs to be trained.
yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't be really good German army soldiers. Yeah, which
um, Angelica, so ACT as a concept, as a therapeutic mechanism, it's got sort of 6 core tenets, right?
yeah.
Should we just talk through those 6 core tenets?
Absolutely. A lot of people, when you talk about ACT, they go, "Oh, isn't this thing like mindfulness therapy?" And then they get stuck into, "I have to do mindfulness exercises and
Mm,
meditation." But
mm,
ACT is so much more. Yes, it
mm,
starts with the one core process of being present in the moment, and
mm.
that's what you need to do to make wise choices. If you are not present, you cannot really choose anything which makes sense. That's why we often start with a mindfulness exercise to be present in the moment, but then it gets to the next process.
Yeah, so I think, and just to sort of therapies in general. So there was this, like, the people, you hear jargon thrown around, like third wave CBTs a lot. It's a bit like, third or fourth wave feminism. It's this, you sound like you're so knowledgeable when you say it. So essentially, cognitive behavioral therapy is what most people that aren't sort of doing Freudian sit on the couch sort of psychodynamic stuff will do. The first wave was just the behavioral therapy, sort of like, Pavlov's dogs. The second wave was CBT. And then the third wave is CBT plus mindfulness. So as Angelica was saying, ACT's got mindfulness, but basically every modern psychotherapy is meditation filled. That's
Absolutely, absolutely. But we might come, when we go through the 6 core processes, also to a slight difference between CBT and ACT, which I
mm,
think is incredibly helpful.
mm,
And I'm not a purist, so I use a whole lot of different models. I just try to simplify it for the book. But in practice, you need to have a fuller toolbox than just one tool. But in ACT, so we start with the mindfulness, with being in the present moment, because we think, and you probably experience this with clients like me, if you're not calm enough, your mind is not making very good choices or not very helpful choices. I try to avoid good and bad, because I really go with helpful and unhelpful. Because good and bad is probably what a lot of people have heard all their life. Be like this, don't be like that, be good, not bad. But I think it is more about what's helpful, what's really helpful. And what I found helpful is to identify what's truly important to people. What is it? What matters? What matters to this person, where you feel nothing else matters than just the next hit? be it the bottle or, whatever the next hit might be. Nothing else matters. But then when we talk, for example, you hear your kids in the background, it sounds like nothing else matters than not wanting to go to bed.
Mm,
But they, of course, value something deep down. And so they care about, let's say, attention. Just really stay with this simple example coming in the
mm,
room through the noise. They want attention. So what do
mm.
they value? Their value is connection.
Yeah.
And so that's where I start with clients that I go in interaction, not in a tick box thing, that I identify what's the value of a client. And then to say, look, that's what you value. You value connection. And then the third process in ACT would be committed action. But committed action is not just that I go, okay, I make you a list and then you do what I tell you to do. Committed action is that someone goes, I decide to go one step towards care. And one example is I worked for a while with homeless people in the city, and I've never seen a homeless person where the dog wasn't groomed and fed and well cared for. I don't know if you agree, but if you go to the city, the dogs are amazing. And then I really identify the value of care. This person, where people would be judgmental, oh, it's just another addict in the street, they care. They care about the dogs. So they have a value of care. And that's what you could work with if the person decides to go in therapy. They do have a value. And then you could align the action with this value. But of course, it's not that simple. And so in ACT, we all try to avoid discomfort. We all try to avoid pain. And in ACT, I think the most difficult part is to be with people, to embrace being with pain. I think that's or suffering or discomfort, whatever shows up. And it's so overwhelming that is for some the reason why they started using.
So Angelica's just very skillfully talked you through half of the sort of six core tenets of ACT without so artfully, and so you can tell she's an experienced and an excellent therapist, that she slipped them in there without sort of clumsily announcing them like I would. But they were, that she was talking about as being in the present moment, so contacting the present moment. They are values and what are our key core tenets. And there's actually something I refer to a lot, especially in sort of when we talk about, as you sort of say, does my action align with it? So people call it a values clarification. So when we're wondering about what should we do in this particular moment, we're sort of, well, does this, is this in keeping with my values? And then the last one is committed action. So again, is this action committed towards my values? So one of the things that I like to break this down in the sort of program I run, and as I have in terms of what we're questing towards, we write down our values. So for me, let's say a value might be exercise, and then we have underneath that a goal that drives us towards our value, and then we have underneath that a task that drives us towards that goal.
Yep. You pilot like this, I pilot like this. Because I think we often have goals, and a goal could be, I need to exercise. I should be exercising. And then I question it. Is it your goal, or is someone telling you, oh, Richard, you should be exercising because exercise is really good for mental health? We know this moving mind and stuff. And then I go, no, no, what's underneath? And I want to go, what's underneath? What's the value? Exercise is something you can do, but the value would be, for example, fitness, or the value would be health. And then I put health and fitness on the side. And that would be my value on the right hand side. And I tell you why. If I put exercise as a value, and this person has a car accident and lays in bed and can't exercise, the value has just died. And then I struggle massively to say, oh, yes, you want to exercise, but sorry, you can't exercise, but maybe in the future you can exercise. If my value is health and fitness, drinking enough water could be a towards move. Trying to blink your eyes could be a towards move. You know what I mean? As long as I breathe, I can then make a step towards my value of health and fitness, even if I'm not actively exercising, running around, or having my weights. So that's
Yeah.
why it is important.
Absolutely. I think you're demonstrating that you're a deeper thinker, because my goal under exercise was to lift heavy weights. So I think we're
That's
sometimes
the
I think
goal.
when we talk,
Fine.
Angelica, we're
As long as you have 2 arms and they are working, but you know
yeah,
that we are working with clients who really
absolutely,
have I have seen
absolutely,
a lot of clients where one catastrophe, and not the
yeah,
client made it, one catastrophe other after the other was happening. There was a
yeah,
cancer diagnosis, and then that was healed, and then there was a car accident, and then and that so, that's why I think the values are going a bit deeper and a bit further and are little bit more flexible in the room. But
yeah. I
maybe
think
let's
what I
move
do.
on to what stands in the way of doing. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, 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 you're right, you're right. Go. I'll catch up. It's all
So
good.
what stands in the room of doing this? So we have now the direction, regardless how we pile up, we have the direction. We know the client, this is what they would to do. What stands in the way? Oh my gosh. Now all the thoughts are showing up. That's too hard. I can't do it. I've never succeeded. I will always fail. I come from a family of failures. I don't know if you have heard this, but we have the tradition in our family. No one gets to anything. No one makes money. No one achieves anything. And I'm just one of them. So we have a lot of unhelpful thoughts.
Mm.
And so diffusion from those thoughts, that is then the fifth core process where we go, we need to create a distance between the person and the thought. And when I say person, I completely include myself. I need to do the same.
And it's defusion, spelled D-E and then fusion. So it's an odd way of spelling it, and it's tricky. And the defusion techniques in ACT are really fun. So some of my favorite ones are like, write your thought, like, that I'm gonna fail, on a sort of on a note, and then read it back to yourself in a funny voice, or sing it to yourself. So it's like you're trying to other that thought from yourself, which so I always have a lot of fun doing this sort of like.
However, in the new ACT courses, you will encounter that the singing voice doesn't land very well
Ah,
with people who have experienced trauma.
right.
They have huge difficulty to diffuse that quickly that it is funny. And so they might really feel devalued. So always check out your relationship
Hmm.
with the client. Or if you listen to this and you think, I would like to try it, there are hundreds of different ways.
Mm.
If you don't like the Mickey Mouse voice, don't do it. If you like the singing and it works, absolutely sing your gut out. In my book, I use the example, and I've heard really good feedback. Go to the dog park and visualize your thoughts as dogs running wild in the dog park. You cannot control them. There's always one border collie rolling in mud and a terrier jumping over a fence. You can't control them. But when you notice them and when you watch them, you also notice that none of them can tell you what to do. Your thoughts can't tell you what to do. They tell you a lot, but they can't make you do something. It is you who decides and not your thoughts.
Mm. I think that rolls finally into your sixth one, because that self as context, because I think that sort of cognitive diffusion, self and context are
Yep.
so
Yep.
connected. Uh,
And the selfish context is often the one called, oh my gosh, that's the most difficult one. What is this? But I think it is a lot about perspective taking.
uh,
It is really seeing you, me seeing you, you seeing me, and having the perspective, not I am stupid. I'm having the thought that I'm stupid. I see myself as part of the bigger universe in the end. I am not just what I tell myself, I'm much more. And so, even the most damaged person, the most broken brain, has a self inside, which has the capacity to take it. To diffuse, to take this perspective, to grow, to change, to get better, to heal.
Yeah, one of the things I really love is there's that sort of Buddhist concept that there's no such thing as the self, and in saying that is that our self is sort of that sort of diffusion of that self as context. We're a constant mix of a million thoughts. I usually use the metaphor of like my thoughts are like a big crowd, and then my consciousness is a spotlight, and so whatever I focus on one thought, I'm actually putting the spotlight on it, but doesn't make, just because I've got the spotlight on it, doesn't make any of those other thoughts more relevant. So right now I could be thinking, I'm a bit hungry. I want to go to the toilet. I need to talk to Angelica and record the podcast. I wonder why my kids were yelling before. I'm all those thoughts at the same time. But just because I'm choosing to focus on this one, I'm sort of, that's what I'm identifying with currently, but it doesn't make any of those thoughts less me. And I think that's for me
Absolutely.
self as context. It's all, we're all things all the time.
Absolutely. And then it links back to how does all of this help make helpful choices? It helps by exactly what you just said to then decide, like the director in the theater, where do I shine the spotlight on? So I'm not the one who stands there like the deer in the headlight and I can't move. No, I'm the one who really can decide where to shine the spotlight on. So I can decide no one will leave the stage. So all our thoughts will be there. No one leaves the stage. No thought will leave your mind forever. But you decide where you shine the light, where the spotlight goes. And that is then your main character. And then you can decide when you're calm enough, is this a wise choice or not? Is it a wise choice or not? So instead of window of tolerance, I call it the window of making helpful choices, the window of making wise choices. Because the window of tolerance, I need to tolerate my neighbor's cat, but it's not that I really like it. But the window of wise choices, I'm in control. I make helpful choices and then I feel empowered.
So I want to just, because again, and you look at artfully cruise to them. So acceptance was the one, the fourth tenet we talked about. And I think what separates ACT from basically all other therapies is ACT does not assume that our core existence is a happy one. It actually assumes that probably our core existence is a bit miserable, sort of Buddhist in that manner. People often talk about like the cavemen that survived were the ones that were thinking there was a tiger in the bush, not that thinking it was wind. So the more naturally pessimistic of us made it this far
Yeah.
along. And so it's about accepting that and not constantly questing towards happiness.
Yes.
And
And when you say acceptance, making room for it, I think making room for it is a much nicer metaphoric word. Acceptance, you have to accept your fate, you have to accept the outcome of the election, whatever. But making room for it is an active thing. You're making room for, I often use the metaphor for the neighbor you don't like when you have a housewarming party, just because it's such a hassle to push the neighbor out. So you rather go, let him come in. I'm making room for him, but I'm not focusing on him.
I
I have
think
other
I
people.
am that neighbor though, Angelica. I think that's the problem.
And then it is up to the one when you enter the house to make room for it instead of being annoyed the whole night. Oh my gosh, Richard is here. Yeah, to make room for it. And then the night can be enjoyable
But I'm so
for
loud and
everyone.
such a bore. How could you ignore me? Um, I think of it this, it's like you can be the Dutch or you can be the Hawaiians, right? So the Dutch had too much water, so they put up dikes and they kept it out, and that's always such work. We can hold up the oncoming water, and the Hawaiians built surfboards, right? So
Yeah.
we let the thoughts or the negative feelings flow over us rather than if we push against them, then we're
Yeah.
focusing on them and we're reinforcing them.
That's John Kabat-Zinn who says, well, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And so that's very act-like. I mean, he comes from the Buddhist tradition, but very act-like. And I think that the big difference between CBT and ACT is in CBT, you still have this, how likely is this? What's the percentage? And you try to really change the thinking. In ACT, you go, whatever you think, you pack it in your backpack, you carry it with you, and then you go in the direction you truly want to go, regardless what your thoughts are. You can think for the rest of your life, I'm not good. As long as you do what matters, have the thought and live a happy life.
Yeah, and I think people can often confuse when we talk about acceptance of these things. They can confuse that with saying that these are great things, that we want them or we're trying to reinforce them. Just because we're accepting them doesn't mean that we're saying they're positive things in our life. I think people can find that as quite a devalidating sometimes when it's communicating, saying, why would I want these sort of things in my life? Why should I
Yeah.
accept them?
That's why I like the metaphors, because that is where you play around is what is the alternative? So let's say you have the housewarming party. The alternative is you spend the whole party at the entrance just making sure that this one neighbor doesn't come, and so you miss out on all the fun. And or you make room, you leave the door open, the neighbor comes, gets ignored or not, and leaves again, and you can still enjoy the party. So that is the acceptance is rather than making room, but acceptance doesn't mean you just have to suck it up, because the next word is commitment, and the commitment is that you are committed to change what you can change.
Yeah. And it's very AA, you know, give me the strength to change what I can and the wisdom to know what I cannot. It's
Yeah.
very AA. Well, I find that really comforting when all these different, you know, so we say Buddhism and AA and ACT. I find it very comforting when they're all meeting together. I find it more worrying when someone's out there with with a completely other review, you know, and I think, oh my goodness, is which one is right? When they're all sort of singing from a similar hymn book, I find that
Yeah.
that's you know,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
To me, um, that very much that idea of, you know, where is this decision coming from, and is it in keeping with with my values? So that values clarification can be so useful in addiction, because obviously everyone seeking help from addiction wants to not be in addiction anymore, but it doesn't mean that they will continue to make decisions that are in keeping with that, and that's the nature of
Absolutely.
addiction, which makes it so
But
tricky.
how do I know that it's not a part of me wanting to make a decision? How do I know that it's really the wise mind? And that's where I always bring in its internal family system. It's Richard Schwartz, but still I bring in the 8 C's of the adult mind. Do you know them?
I do
The
know.
eight.
I've not done
No?
any
Okay.
IFS.
So the 8 C's of the internal family system basically is a different model. We don't need to go into it, but it has a very, very neat way to talk with the client about when is it only a part and when is it really your wise mind, your clear mind, your sober mind wanting to make a decision. Because the client might say, oh, I want to move in with Emma because she's the love of my life. And I really, really, and you don't know where this part is coming from. Might sound good. You might think as a therapist, oh my gosh, another, um, catastrophe on the horizon. And then we can check with the client if the mind is really having those 8 C's. And one of the C's is being calm. So is your pulse and your breathing really going hand in hand? Or are you all over the place? And then you think you have to decide to move in with Emma or whatever it might be. The next is clarity. How clearly can you see? And the 8 C's is just 8 words with C. And the third one is curiosity. Curiosity. Are you able to look at it from different angles? Or are you very defensive? Don't
Mm,
touch it. This is what I'm
mm,
doing. Then it's not coming from a calm mind. The next one is a really big one, and we haven't touched on it. It's compassion. Has this decision compassion for yourself and compassion for the other? Is it really something which fits in these open hearted, being present, being really fair towards yourself? The next one is courage, creativity, connectedness, and confidence. So, and I often check with my clients all 8 C's, because the conversations, even just about the 8 C's, leads us in on different avenues and helps the client to get a structure for their own future where there's no therapist around to make more helpful choices.
mm. And I think what I really liked about that one is the curiosity one. So often when I'm talking to someone about decisions, and to use a phrase that we previously talked about this podcast, was is a phrase in sort of psychiatry of don't be weird. So avert what you're feeling. I think it's weird to not say what you're thinking in the moment with the client. So I've all throughout my training, I'd sort of be in the room with someone, a senior person, and they would leave and they would tell me their thoughts on what that interaction was about. And it always occurred to me, well, that was a weird thing to not say in the room with the person. Why are we keeping this from the person? And so that sort of, I think that curiosity, that the willingness to think in another way. And what I often say to people in this sort of situation is maybe it's someone that says, oh, look, I'm going to return to having a drink socially, or I think I'm going to, as you say, I'm going to move in with this person that we previously talked about. I say, well, okay, I'm worried about this for these reasons. But then usually we park it there and we say, but what I've done there is I've at least set up that we're going to talk about that later. And my view is that if we can remain, I've voiced my concern and perhaps my skepticism, and you've listened to them and you're okay with them. but you're still going to do it. I said, great, but at least we can then talk about it later, and then we're going to have this conversation, not as an, oh, I told you so, but is this the, I'm now more worried about these concerns, and do we have that relationship? We can continue to have that. And I think if someone lacks that curiosity, that they get very defensive and unable to talk about it, that's a problem.
Because curiosity goes hand in hand. It's just a seatbelt, but it goes hand in hand with noticing, observing. Do you notice which part of you really, really wants to do this? Let's say the socially drinking. Which part of you really? So I want to belong. I want to be one of them. I want to be normal. I want to be whatever it might be. So we notice it, and we can notice it with curiosity, or we can notice it with judgment. We can notice it with curiosity and compassion. Of course, you want to belong. Of course, you don't want to be an alcoholic. Of course, you want to be just like a normal person, whatever this is. But if we have curiosity, we do notice without judgment.
Yeah. And I think that's, as you were sort of saying, uh, what is the addiction doing for you is a really important thing that I think is sometimes left out of addiction treatment. Says, my view on addiction is, as we've talked about in the previous episode, is very much it's a coping mechanism. It's a coping mechanism that's making everything worse. It's a maladaptive, it's a bad coping mechanism, but it is a coping mechanism to something. And I think sometimes some addiction sort of recovery programs are too afraid to paint anything positive in the addiction. But if we don't identify what it's addressing, how are we gonna
And that's
recover?
when you say the addictive behavior is bad. I mean, I start honestly, and now I'm more working in supervision. I start by we celebrate what the addiction has done for you, as in the positive stuff. That's where we start. Because otherwise, I don't see the client as someone who has made a good choice in that moment. I would see him as someone who made a bad choice. That's why I start with what has it helped you with? Oh, it killed my pain. It killed my boredom. It killed my social anxiety. It helped me. And we celebrate it. So we don't have the bad addiction and the good behavior. We have, wow, that was really helpful. Then I personally build the scaffolding. I don't move immediately into can we reduce. And when I work with people who work with in addiction, I don't see haven't seen a lot of addicted clients, but they work in addiction. Some of my supervisees, it's all about reducing the units and reducing. And I go, build the scaffolding first. Because if you just reduce, the pain will increase. And then you need a different painkiller. And then you substitute one addiction with another.
Yeah, there's a wonderful lie in a book. I'm trying to start a rap battle between myself and Anna Lemke, who's an American addiction psychiatrist of note and has no idea who I am, Angelica. But she wrote this wonderful book called Dopamine Nation, and in it she told a fantastic lie where she said, if you just stop using you're doing your addiction for a month, you'll feel better, and if you don't, then there's something else. It's not the addiction making you feel miserable, which I thought was, an incredible lie that I can try and call her out on every podcast so that eventually she then gets in an argument with me and my podcast blows up. This is the long-term marketing plan.
I'm with you on this mission because that is so wrong and I think so dismissive. It's in a way saying, if only you wouldn't be using, you would be fine.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Acknowledging the helpful part of the addiction and then building the scaffolding with the 6 core processes of ACT or other elements from other therapies as well. And then what I find is that it really reduces the abuse of substances significantly.
Absolutely.
Even without all the time talking about how many units did you have and did you fill in your list and when, just really not automatically, but as a side product, because then the deep yearning for connection, the deep yearning for love, appreciation, and is fulfilled in different ways than the false promises of the substance.
Yeah, and I think we see it with all maladaptive coping mechanisms, not just addiction, but and someone who is really successful, but has a lot of, let's say, trauma pain, emotional pain of some sort, but has managed to build up some maladaptive coping mechanisms like addiction, or it can be self-harm, or emotional distance or anything like that. That is actually, but has built a really successful life. That is actually a barrier to treatment in terms of those defenses around that maladaptive coping mechanism are going to be so strong, because if I collapse in a heap, then my defenses around this is an obviously not working maladaptive coping mechanism. But if I'm a fantastic, successful CEO, then I need to protect that at all costs, right? Because addressing this and tearing down those defenses is gonna be catastrophic.
And because I'm not an addiction specialist, I can be wired with my terminology. So I call a lot of things addiction, and not just, the core. So
Yeah.
I would call addicted to gym, addicted to
Yeah.
working, addicted to prestige, and I would all call it equally addictive behavior. And I wouldn't really distinguish between the really bad ones. These are the ones, who are shooting up, and the better ones, that's the ones who are working really hard. So I just really level them all out, because it's all maladaptive or unhelpful behavior, not helping the person to go towards what they really want to go towards.
Yeah, and you do see it a lot with people. Substitutions, what people do. You get sober from alcohol, you get into heroin, but you also see you become a marathon runner, and you're still engaging in that same avoidance of emotions. You are in an avoidance
Absolutely.
game rather than an acceptance game, and you can see, or you become a workaholic. And you see it the opposite way as well. Men will retire at 65, or women. Sorry, I shouldn't be so gendered, but people will retire at 65 and have been working 100-hour weeks, and then an addiction shows, because they've never sat with their emotions before.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That's why and I know you are too a big advocate of really getting or moving away from this taboo about these addicted people and us. So it's really us. And it's not them and us. And there's not really a distinction between the alcoholic and the workaholic. It is just a different drug they used, or they were introduced to. I think also about all the people who get addicted to painkillers after operations. They were introduced to, or they introduced themselves to this substance, and that is what's hanging around, equally like someone was introduced to the substance of being a workaholic.
Yeah, one of the things I do in my sort of therapies, Angelica, and I always refer to myself as, I always say we when we're having something, rather than you or they or people with an addiction. And I know I don't usually talk about this with my clients, but I've never had an addiction. But I just think it's an inclusive manner of a way of talking about things, and I do think that anyone could get an addiction at any time. I think if we other it like that, it's foreign.
Yeah.
I think it's really
So I
important
think
too.
that it's very act congruent, where you really go, we are very similar in our brain, and we are very similar in avoiding pain. And you said you never had an addiction. I always say I have my addictions too. They are just more socially accepted, and maybe not keeping me so much away from what I want to achieve, but they can keep me away as well. So it's just a
Uh,
gradual difference between maybe me and someone who is abusing alcohol, but in act, we are all the same.
yeah, but I'm obviously more self-actualized than you, though, Angelica, so we can. It's been awesome having you on. I'm incredibly grateful for it. You're told by my producer we have to wrap up, but I'm so grateful for you coming on. I want to say it again. Sit, Stay, Grow is a wonderful a book. I'm a huge fan. It keeps on getting stolen. It's probably the most stolen book from my award, which says some great
The
things
dogs.
about it.
The dogs. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Angelica.